In the dusty town of Redemption Creek, Kansas, the setting sun painted the few wooden buildings orange, as the dust raised by wagons created a desolate scene. News traveled like wildfire across the prairie, and the latest ignited the morals of the few inhabitants. Eleanor Vance, at 60 years old, was to be auctioned off by her own children. Yes, auctioned like cattle, due to debts and greed, in an act that would wound the soul of anyone with a shred of compassion. Eleanor, who had once been the vital force of her family, was now just a burden in her old age, stripped of her possessions but not her dignity. Her graying hair and deep facial wrinkles told stories of harsh winters and arid summers, of a life dedicated to the land and to the children who now disowned her. It was a scene that defied faith, a silent cry of abandonment echoing through the fields. No one dared to raise their voice against Eleanor's children, brutish and unscrupulous men, heirs to a respected name they now dragged through the mud. The town, though shocked, remained in its compliant silence, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of conformity. But one man, sitting in the shadows of the old tavern, heard the cruel gossip with a different kind of sorrow in his chest. His name was Elijah Freeman, a black man, a widower, with hands calloused by the earth and eyes marked by the melancholy of someone who had already lost much in life. Elijah lived in a small cabin on the outskirts of Redemption Creek, subsisting on a small plot of land where he grew corn and potatoes. Life had not been kind to him. Slavery had freed him only to cast him into a world where freedom was often just a name. He had lost his wife and children to a disease that swept through the region years ago, and since then, solitude was his only companion. He was not rich nor influential, and few noticed him in town, but his heart held a purity and empathy that many of the respectable men did not possess. The news of Eleanor's auction stirred something deep within him. Perhaps it was the memory of his own loneliness, perhaps the injustice of seeing a woman treated as merchandise, or perhaps the memory of his own mother, who had grown old with nowhere to lay her head. Indignation bubbled in his chest, an unexpected flame amidst the hopelessness. He knew he didn't have much, but he felt an irrepressible urge, an inner voice telling him he couldn't just stand by. The auction day arrived, charged with a heavy atmosphere and an air of morbid spectacle. Redemption Creek's main square was more crowded than usual, with curiosity outweighing decency. Eleanor Vance, in a worn but clean dress, stood on a makeshift platform, her gaze fixed on the horizon, refusing to meet anyone's eyes, especially those of her children, who seemed to revel in her humiliation. Bids started low, almost mockingly, uttered by men who saw in her only dying labor force or an opportunity to mock another's misfortune. Eleanor's children, with cynical smiles, hurried the auctioneer, eager to get rid of the problem. The auctioneer, a fat, sweaty man, could barely hide his discomfort, but money spoke louder. With each bid, Eleanor's dignity seemed to fade a little more into the dusty air. The silence, broken only by the bids and the distant bark of a dog, was heavy, foreshadowing a painful outcome. No one expected the chain of inhumanity to be broken. Suddenly, a deep, firm voice echoed in the square, breaking the chorus of whispers and laughter. "I bid $5. It was Elijah, standing on the periphery of the crowd, his head held high, his few crumpled dollars in hand. An incredulous silence hung over the square. Eleanor's children exchanged glances, surprised and irritated. Who was this poor black man, daring to interrupt the Vance family's business? Laughter and mockery began to arise, but Elijah did not falter. He had saved every penny, economized every coin with the sweat of his hard labor, and that money represented not only his livelihood but his last hope for a purpose. The auctioneer, embarrassed, cleared his throat. Any higher bid than $5? The silence that followed was deafening. No one else dared to raise a hand. Some out of disinterest, others out of shame, still others out of silent respect for Elijah's act. Thus, in an act of desperation and compassion, Elijah Freeman bought Eleanor Vance. She, stunned, finally looked at him, and in that gaze Elijah saw not shame, but a spark of surprise and perhaps, just perhaps, a glimmer of gratitude. Eleanor could hardly believe what had happened. She expected the worst, to be taken by some cruel farmer to work herself to death, or to be thrown onto the streets. But to be bought by a poor, unknown black man was something she hadn't even imagined in her worst nightmares. As Elijah led her out of the square, under the curious and judgmental gazes of the crowd, she felt a complex mixture of relief and shame. What kind of life awaited her now? She, a 60-year-old white woman, under the ownership of a black man? The social conventions of the time made the situation even more delicate and dangerous for both. But Elijah's silent firmness and the dignity with which he treated her, without a word of censure or pity, began to calm the turmoil in her mind. He led her to his small cabin, a modest but clean and organized place, where the smell of burning wood and fresh coffee hung in the air. That place, however simple, represented a refuge from the nightmare she had just lived. In the days that followed, a strange and delicate routine settled between Elijah and Eleanor. He did not treat her as a servant or possession, but with the respect one would give a guest. He shared his modest meals, tended the fire and the house, and talked with her about the weather, the harvest, the small events of life in Redemption Creek. Eleanor, in turn, began to open up, to tell fragments of her story. The hardship of farm life, lost love, shattered dreams, and profound disappointment with her children. Elijah listened patiently, his own eyes reflecting a silent understanding. They were two souls marked by life, finding a safe harbor in each other. One day, while Eleanor was helping Elijah mend a fence, something unusual happened. She noticed a small locket Elijah wore around his neck, almost hidden under his shirt. An old locket with a peculiar design, a stylized flower engraved on the darkened metal. A chill ran down Eleanor's spine. She had seen that same symbol before, a long time ago, in a place her memory had tried to erase. Eleanor felt her heart pound in her chest. "Where did you get that?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper, pointing to the locket. Elijah stopped what he was doing, surprised by the intensity of the question. He took off the locket and offered it to her. "It was my mother's," he said. She always said it was the only thing left of her family before she was brought here. Eleanor's trembling fingers took the object. The flower design was unmistakable. She turned it over, and on the back, almost illegible with time, were the initials RV. The air seemed to thin on Elijah's small property. The letters, the same ones she had seen engraved on her own mother's ring, a ring that had been stolen years ago, along with a small photo of her older sister, missing since childhood. Eleanor, the youngest daughter, had grown up hearing about this sister she never knew, taken by land merchants who promised a better life. Eleanor's heart filled with an overwhelming mix of shock and an almost unreal hope. The puzzle pieces fit together with painful and redemptive clarity. Elijah's mother, the woman who had loved and protected him, was Eleanor's lost sister. The locket, the flower symbol, the initials, everything pointed to a truth that transcended time and distance. Elijah, the man who had bought her and offered her shelter, was her nephew, her sister's son. The revelation brought tears to both their eyes, tears of loss for stolen time, but also of deep joy for the rediscovered connection. That poor man who had saved her from the humiliation of her own children was not a stranger, but her own flesh and blood, the last living memory of her deepest family. At that moment, the auction, the shame, the loneliness, everything lost its weight. They were no longer just two survivors in the immensity of Kansas, but a family forged in adversity and united by an invisible thread of destiny. Elijah's house, once a refuge, became a home, filled not only with the promise of a future, but with the warm presence of a past that refused to be forgotten. That unexpected encounter, motivated by the purest compassion, revealed a secret that would change their lives forever, proving that even in the darkest corners of injustice, hope and human connection can flourish.